Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Frank walked briskly down the corridor, his heart beating to the rhythm of a military march. A group of students with tense faces were discussing something loudly. And when the guy got close to it, Frank called out to him, "You, shining like a brass nickel. Did you win on the field of miracles?" The young man stopped. "Guys, I really won, just not in the show, the most important game of life." The group of students got animated, but come on. Then why are you dragging your feet? We're all here waiting for the verdict. We're guessing where we'll be sent to work out. Frank gave his friends a happy look. Guys, just 5 minutes ago I had similar feelings, but now I'm ready to jump without insurance from a Stalinist high-rise. Because I really got a lucky ticket. I'm going to work. Congratulations are pouring in from all sides, and the small group was joined by other news lovers. There were even voices in the crowd calling for the lucky guy to be pumped, but Frank himself resolutely refused to fulfill this tradition. "No, guys, that's unnecessary. I'm lucky and I agree with that. But you should not anger Mrs. Luck, otherwise she will turn her wheel in the opposite direction." The young man struggled to get out of his friend's embrace and continued his journey. He had to enter the chancery and visit several other important offices. But these troubles were pleasant, because it was with them that his new life should begin. Back in 9th grade, Frank himself had drawn invisible boundaries on the map of his future. Studying in a village school was in this plan, meant as a launching pad for the future. Like most rural youth, Frank dreamed of living in the city where there are so many opportunities. This goal was formed in elementary school, but only in high school it acquired the features of a well-thought-out plan. And the first point of this project was good academic performance. Nature did not endow the boy with special talents, if not to count perseverance. He spent hours singing over his textbooks to memorize the homework material. The mother was pleased to see her son so diligent. "You're good. Such diligent people conquer cities." Even the song talks about it. James did not support his wife and corrected her. First of all, the famous song talks about brave people. It is such people who conquer both cities and mountains. Second, rote learning does not give solid knowledge. If a person does not understand the meaning of what he reads, automatic memorization can one day play a cruel joke on him. That is why I am categorically against such methods. Frank had his own opinion, but he did not express it to his parents, believing that the moment had not yet come. Only after receiving a certificate with only 2 4s, he self-confidently declared, "Let me not be given to grab the stars from the sky, but I will definitely comfortably settle in this life." It was unusual to hear such words from a 17-year-old boy, and the graduate's father objected. "If I understand you correctly, you have already chosen the path of an opportunist in advance." Frank didn't have time to respond to your father's rage because his mother stood up for him. Frank's judgment is correct. Today, the situation is such that whoever has time wins. How many scientists are unloading the wagon now? No one needs their discoveries because it's time for other values. James was adamantly opposed to the changes that were taking place in all walks of life. This is all going to end badly. I'm sure it won't be 2 decades before they remember the experience of past generations. The country cannot be trusted with opportunists. Such people are especially dangerous in such a difficult business as medicine. Do not forget that our son decided to devote his life to saving people, and this is a huge responsibility. And it requires a calling. To settle the argument, Frank then tried to calm his father down. "Dad, you just misunderstood me. I chose my profession out of my heart, but I want to take every opportunity I can to work in a famous hospital." "Dad, I'm sorry, but I don't want to be a country doctor." James just waved his hand in despair. "So you don't want to live in the countryside? You've already got all the chips in place. Anyway, do whatever you want. I won't say another word. But know this, Frank, I don't support such intentions." The head of the household felt deeply insulted and even refused to dinner. But Kelly knew that the man was resilient. She was more concerned about her son's future and liked that her boy had already mapped out everything for himself. The woman looked fondly at her son Frank, not paying attention to Daddy's nagging and do. "As your heart tells you, it's the right thing to do." And the young man, all the years of study at the university, strictly followed this rule. He was not distracted by trifles and diligently learned the basics of medicine. But even with such a busy schedule, the guy had time for fun and girls. Since Frank by nature was a pragmatist, he did not allow himself to relax in all matters. His relationships with young ladders usually had a temporary nature and almost always ended amicably, parting with subsequent friendship. The young man was satisfied with such an algorithm because he was not going to get a family yet. But in his last year of study, he had to change his principles because he met a girl who facilitated his entry into elite society. This acquaintance, in fact, became the ticket to life, which every young man dreams of pulling out. In the midst of one of the student parties, his best friend approached him. Jacob was already well tipsy, and next to him was a luxuriously dressed maiden. The girl was looking around unhappily, and a squeamish expression froze on her face. But Jacob paid no attention to the mood of his companion. He carelessly grabbed the girl by the shoulders and, in an oratorical tone, said, "Frank, meet Evelyn. The soul of social gatherings has descended from Olympus today and decided to grace our humble party with her presence." The singer smiled and even made eyes at Frank. The mask of rejection immediately disappeared from her face, replaced by arrogant smugness. By the instantaneous change, it wasn't hard to guess that she was used to flattery. A ridiculous thought slipped into Frank's mind. This damsel has an excellent skill. Mimicry. Straight talent turns out even better than a chameleon. Of course, the girl couldn't read the thoughts of a tall guy of political build. But after such an impressive presentation, she capriciously put on her lips and expressed her displeasure to her companion. "Jacob, you promised me an amazing evening. This is incredibly boring. I want to dance." Her complaint was more like the whim of a spoiled child. So Jacob only winked cheerfully at his comrade. His look eloquently said that he is tired of the society of a status girl and wants to switch to other members of the fair sex. Frank looked at the couple confusedly. Evelyn, not waiting for a clear answer to her proposal, began to move to the music. Her movements were beautiful and plastic, and Frank involuntarily admired the girl's arbitrary dance. Apparently, Jacob was waiting for just such a reaction. He made some clumsy movements to the music, which allowed him to get closer to his friend. Choosing a convenient moment, he whispered in his ear, "Look what a reporting girl. By the way, her daddy's in a good position, so I suggest you take a good look at her. You don't want to be the black sheep." Frank, too, made a funny limb action, and also asked in a whisper, "Why don't you take care of this girl yourself? Why don't you? I'll be rolled in the asphalt for cheating. By the way, that's her best friend. And you're just being my friend and giving me this doll. Jacob, you know these girls are not my type, right?" Evelyn noticed that the young men were whispering about something boys. "That's not fair. I could get offended." Jacob started doing pretzels in front of the girl. "Evelyn, don't take offense. We can't take it. Then tell me, Jacob, what were you whispering about?" The question sounded demanding, and the boy was happy to play along with the capricious girl. Light on the heat. We were not plotting against the enemy, but admiring our beauty. Jacob's image of a jester turned out perfectly, and the girl laughed, and the guy said seriously, nodding at Frank, "You made a very strong impression on a friend of mine, and he was wondering if you had a date. For tonight." "Not yet." Evelyn had a smile on her face, and Frank wanted to fall through the floor. But the rules of etiquette required him to be polite and delicate to the girl, who annoyed him more and more every minute. Jacob was already dancing frantically at the other end of the room, and Frank was mentally scolding him with words that should not be spoken aloud. Evelyn saw his confusion as a sign to act. She came so close that the young man felt her breath on his neck. The scent of expensive perfume made him a little dizzy. At that time, a slow dance replaced the fast composition. Evelyn snuggled up to the young man. "I love this track." Frank drove his partner confidently. His thoughts were far away. He remembered how he had danced to this music in the village club at the disco with Maria. The girl was 4 years older than him. What had seemed like an unbridgeable chasm then? The 17-year-old was secretly in love with Maria, who immediately cut off all his hopes. "Frank, you're a good boy, but you're small. While you grow up, I'll grow old. That was the first and only rejection. But after that incident, Frank was wary of meeting girls for a long time. However, his insecurity then disappeared, and he began to behave more boldly with representatives of the weaker sex. "Hey, where are you?" Evelyn's sharp voice pulled him out of his memories. The girl was looking at him with a smile. The music had stopped. "Did you fall asleep? Passed out a little?" Frank took his partner under his arm, then Stuffy. "Why don't we go for a little walk?" Evelyn again made a disgruntled grimace, but agreed. "Actually, I came here to unwind a little, and I'm just getting into the swing of things. And I don't like these kinds of events. I like the theater or movies better." The street lingo didn't fit the image of a society girl. Frank couldn't help laughing. "Evelyn, you really are an extraordinary girl. Tell me, doesn't your father scold you for such language?" The girl was not embarrassed at all. "My dad could still bend my ears so far back that my ears would curl up." They stepped outside, and the fresh summer breeze began to caress their exposed bodies. The girl let her guard down, and another gust lifted her short, puffy skirt. She exclaimed with indignation, "Oh, how unexpected." "Frank, don't look, or I'll burn with shame." The young man remembered again about the beast that could change its coloring. He felt an unpleasant tension, and he had a strong desire to get rid of this girl. "Evelyn, let me walk you out." She was surprised so quickly. "I thought we were going for a little walk. It's such lovely weather, except for the wind. Besides, I've got a test tomorrow. I've got practice tonight." Frank was lying outright, but Evelyn took everything at face value. She did not want to let the young man go, so she began to beg him. "I don't want to go home." "Well, let's walk around a little more, and with practice I can help you. I wonder how my dad can arrange it. He's the head of my department at work. Are you lucky?" "What department does he run?" Evelyn found the question overwhelming. She stopped and wrinkled her neat forehead, which indicated that her brain was working actively. "Man, this is stupid. But I forgot. You know, Frank, I don't really care what my folks do. I got my own game. If it's no secret, what are your passions? Where are you studying?" "I'm still in the process of making up my mind. I've only managed to finish college, but I'm stuck in an office. A prospect for me." Frank had already realized that Evelyn was a prime example of an amorphous being. He was becoming increasingly weighed down by the girl's company, and he was very happy when they found themselves at the end of the route. "This is where I live on the 8th floor, our apartment. But in the summer, I miss here alone because my parents like to hang out at the cottage." Frank, not knowing why, cut the girl off rather rudely. "You know, Evelyn, I come from a village too. I'm probably dumb by your standards, and I'm not his son Lan." The girl clapped her hands and even jumped on the spot from the excess of emotion. "You're messing with me. Or is it true? It's cool. It's the first time I've ever had a guy from the country." The excitement. The girl's delight was real. But Frank was embarrassed by the fact that she had already enlisted him as one of her own. But what pissed him off the most was the lingo, the girls. "Listen, Evelyn, you're very difficult to talk to. It's like I'm talking to a foreigner. Where did you get that kind of lingo? You don't like it. To be honest, I prefer normal words. You'd think there were only counts and dukes in your village." Frank wanted to correct the girl, but realized it was useless. He hurriedly said goodbye to her, because he was sure that their new meeting was out of the question. All the way back, he mentally scolded Jacob for giving him such an unexpected surprise. The next day, he himself visited his comrade early in the morning and pounced on him. "Jacob, you set this up for me on purpose. Where did you dig it up? It's a miracle." He told his friend the details of the previous evening, and he laughed heartily at him. "Look, I didn't realize it was Evelyn who was so very nice to me. Evelyn, you could just say that. I met this girl by chance. And then yesterday I was walking along, and all of a sudden, she's sitting on my ear. I'm dumbfounded. I'm thinking about what she's going to do. I decided to bring her to our party. By the way, Evelyn ruined my whole evening. She's been pestering me like a leaf to one side." Jacob peacefully remarked, "Don't take offense at me, but I can take it once." But neither Frank nor his friend Jacob did not know how persistent girls can be. A tall, handsome man at first sight conquered the daughter of an important official. and she decided to use all means to win his favor. Just the next day, Evelyn reminded me of herself. Frank had already forgotten about yesterday's meeting and was on his way to the dormitory after the lecture. But he was stopped by a familiar voice. "Hey, where are you in such a hurry?" The first saving thought was that the voice was just similar. He didn't turn around and walked forward just as confidently. But the call came again in a more elevated tone. "Who am I calling to?" "Frank, slow down." He began to turn around slowly, thinking that now he would send this insolent girl away. But seeing in the shining parts of Evelyn remembered the peculiarities of her speech. The girl stood leaning against a gorgeous red car. "The way I look in the background of this car, it's the one my dad gave me for my birthday. He's still hoping I'll straighten up and get my act together." Evelyn spoke without letting the guy get a word in edgewise. Frank realized that the opinions of the people around her didn't matter to her. She didn't even wait for him to answer her question and continued in the same vein. "I actually asked for a different model, but my dad told me no. Said I didn't deserve it. I'm a huge fan of cars. When I was 14, I stole my dad's Mercedes. He almost killed me then. Frank, where's your car?" Evelyn started looking around. "Another suitable vehicle for a young man." Frank answered with the same nonchalant look, "And I haven't earned it yet. My father is also a simple laborer, and he has only an old at his disposal." Evelyn was obviously disappointed by the young man's answer. The smile on her face faded, and she politely suggested to sit under the vis-a-you-know. "I'd rather walk. All the more I'm not far away." Breathing a sigh of relief, he went on his way. But his joy was premature. The next day, Evelyn was waiting for him outside the university. "You ran away from me so fast yesterday that I didn't realize it." Frank had to strain to keep up appearances. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, but I was in a hurry." The girl grinned crookily. "Okay, I'll forgive you for the first time. You haven't gotten away from me today. Can we sit somewhere or just walk around? How would you feel about a program like that?" "I have to disappoint you. But I have other plans for tonight." "Okay, then let's meet tomorrow." To get rid of the clingy girl, Frank was quick to agree. That evening, he went to his friend's room. "Jacob, you're my friend." The friend was preparing a modest dinner and asked in surprise, "I don't know what you're talking about." "It's about the same thing. She's stalking me." Jacob stared at Frank. "Who is she?" "Look, don't play dumb. I mean Evelyn. She's been giving me a hard time. She met me yesterday in a fancy car. Today she shows up again. I don't know what the problem is. How hard is it for you to pay attention to a girl?" Jacob has nothing to talk to her about. Keeping a nonchalant look, he arranged the plates on the small table. "Don't boil. Let's regret what God sent and cool down a little." Jacob divided your ears of ham into 2 portions and continued, "I understand, and even accept your indignation. But if you look on the bright side, we're all human, not without flaws. Evelyn's not a bad girl, but she's got a lot on her mind. She's going to get away from you on her own. Girls like that aren't known for their consistency. He'll give her a little attention. How hard can it be?" Frank listened to his friend and scrambled an omelette. "Actually, it's not hard, but she annoys me a lot. I've never dealt with such a clingy young lady before. It's the cost of upbringing. Her parents are very busy people, and her daughter was raised by everybody. Speaking of parents, Evelyn said something about her father being the head of the department. He used to be. Now, Sebastian's moved to the ministry, overseeing medical facilities all over the region. He's a great guy. By the way, no bullshit. How do you know him?" "I had the pleasure of talking to him when he was still in charge. I interned there. I think he liked me." Jacob quickly cleared the table and said casually, "You know, friend, nowadays domestic medicine is not in the best condition. Personally, I do not like the fate of being sent to a remote village to work out." Frank supported his comrade with an eloquent sigh. "I too am most afraid of it. In our village outpatient clinic is kept only on the enthusiasm of an old paramedic, who cannot go on a well-deserved retirement. There's no equipment, no medicines either. The building will soon collapse from boredom." Jacob rejoiced. "You see, you yourself confirm the truth of my words. The only way not to be trapped in some backwater is to make useful connections. Personally, I've already got it all covered. Frank was surprised. Have you been offered a job in the... Sadly, no. But a private clinic has recently opened in the city where I live. Quite a decent prospect for an aspiring doctor. So it's a good time for you to consider future employment. And Maria and her dad, for what it's worth, it's about time you did. You know, I'd marry that girl for a good place. Jacob, but she's Frank. Remember the saying, we'll see eye to eye. That's the one. The next day, Frank waited for Evelyn with a bouquet of flowers at the agreed place. The girl was genuinely pleased with the modest gift. Great, like a real romance with flowers. Now you only have to invite me to the movies. I almost guessed. I didn't know what to offer you. But since you chose a movie, your wish is my command. They watched an Italian comedy, and Evelyn laughed heartily at the unlucky hero. Impressions overwhelmed the girl, and she remembered the funniest episodes for a long time. At the end of the evening, Frank realized that he was not bored and even enjoyed Evelyn's company. I don't know why he asked. Where's your car? She grinned mischievously. It's in the garage, bored. Dad took the keys. As punishment for my disobedience. He can't get used to the fact that I'm an adult, and he tries to punish me more severely for the slightest offense. What's your offense? Yeah, we had a girls' night out, and I had a few drinks. I just killed someone. And my dad gave me such a hard time. He can smell booze a mile away. But he's right. You shouldn't drive like that. Frank, you too. I only had a little bit. I just wet my tongue. The girl was upset that the young man had taken her father's side. She pouted her lips out of habit and said goodbye. For a whole week, Evelyn did not appear. Frank did not take the initiative to meet her either. Friday night, Jacob showed up out of the blue. Listen, buddy, it's been a long time since we've had checkers in our hands. Let's go out. Frank. I really wanted to accept my friend's offer, but my financial situation didn't allow me to spend too much. Jacob, I'd love to, but I'm pretty broke. Not a problem. My folks gave me a little bit of a windfall, so I'm ready to buy my best friend a neutral cocktail to lighten the mood a little bit. We had a little fight with Evelyn. It's nothing. She and I are always picking at each other over nothing. I don't know why we have to poison each other's lives. We just run away. Jacob sighed, not without tragedy. Easy to say, but impossible to do. The picture and I are one and the same. I can't live without each other. Oh, by the way, I have no idea how your lady of the heart is. She hasn't shown up in a week. She's offended by me too. I wonder what you insulted her about? That I'm against drunk driving. Jacob, you're getting to that serious stuff already? Progress? Well, let's not waste valuable time. Let's go. There's a nice place nearby. We'll sit for a while. Dusk was falling over La and the crowds. The idle youths spilled out onto the city streets. Older citizens were also strolling around, some in pairs and some alone. In other words, the atmosphere was conducive to a pleasant passing of free time. Jacob tugged his friend by the sleeve of the light. Now we have a cozy landing, woven in that bar. The guy pointed with his hand at the glowing sign Las Vegas. Of course, the name does not correspond to the content. But the prices there are more or less adequate. The young men were about to go down the stairs as there were loud shouts, and then a crowd of girls in evening dresses rushed straight at them. The friends barely had time to dodge the cavalcade. Jacob said confusedly, "Wow. You and I almost got caught in the act. Listen, Frank, maybe I imagined it, but I think your Evelyn was among the marvelous Amazons." Frank did not have time to answer, because women's screams and swearing were heard already in the street. The guys rushed to the place of the quarrel between the not quite sober ladies. The street was well lit, which allowed to clearly see the faces of the ladies, who decided to clarify relations with the help of fists and handbags. At the forefront of the battle was Evelyn. The girl was wearing a short dress, tightly pull off the figure, despite the movement-shy outfit and high stilettos. Evelyn deftly maneuvered herself into a narrow patch, not far from the entrance to the bar. She clutched her opponent's hair with a dead grip and shouted loudly, "I'm going to give you a sweet life. I still have you on the beach. Girlfriends." Her attackers tried to pull her away, but Evelyn lashed out each time, continuing to strike at the victim's neck. Casual witnesses cheered the girls on. But after a minute, police shouts were heard. Everyone scattered. Only the two rivals continued to struggle. Jacob had a few seconds to assess the situation. He pushed his comrade. "It seems that it is time for us to intervene. Otherwise, our mutual acquaintance will be taken away and put in the monkey house." The young man rushed toward the girls and grabbed Evelyn in an armful. The girl heatedly stabbed him in the knee with her heel. Jacob soon studied and howled in pain. "Wild. If it weren't for your father, Evelyn, I'd be smacking you like that right now." There was no time to settle things. Frank caught up with the girl who had gone ducking and sternly ordered her to stand. Evelyn was quite drunk and not firmly on the ground. The girl made a careless movement and almost fell. "I'll still do that goat." She dared to threaten me. Holding onto his injured knees and writhing in pain, Jacob approached. He immediately lashed out at Evelyn. "What the hell are you doing? You're out of control." The girl recognized the guy and joyfully exclaimed, "Jacob, how did you get here?" "I was on vacation with the girls." "I can see the condition you're in. Frank, let's get her home or she'll do something else." The girl resisted. "You don't have to drag me. I'll walk myself. I've got a car right here. We'll be there in 5 minutes." "No, darling, you can't drive like that." "Frank, I'll hold her. You get a cab." The girl was cursing and swearing the whole way. So the friends had a lot of trouble while they delivered the precious cargo to the place of residence. They rang the doorbell for a long time until Sebastian himself opened the door. When he saw his daughter, he knew what had happened. "I don't know what to do with her. She's out of control." "Thank you, young people." "You're welcome. We just couldn't leave Maria in the lurch. She was having a fight with her girlfriend. I'm sorry. Her mother and I tried to talk some sense into her. It's like she's doing things to spite us. We've even stopped going to the cottage. We're afraid she's sleeping at home." The man was fidgeting with confusion. He asked Frank, who shouldered the girl, "If you don't mind carrying her there." The guy carefully made his way into the living room and lowered Evelyn onto the couch. The girl no longer offered any resistance because she was sleeping a deep sleep. Young people began to say goodbye, and Frank, before leaving, noticed. The car was left in the parking lot near the bar. "Thank you. I'll call my driver now. He'll drive it to the garage. Thanks a lot again." When they were outside, Jacob said meaningfully, "I think we had a good evening. And without the cocktail, the adrenaline is flowing. Well, my friend, shall we continue or shall we go home?" "I think we should go home. We should check out your car." "Yeah, Evelyn did a great job molding it for me. As a friend." Jacob hurt his leg pretty bad when they got to the dorm. He couldn't lean on it anymore. In the room, Frank examined the once down, neck, knee, comrades. "Yes, Jacob, I think it's very serious. I can see it's not normal, and I've been severely crippled. I'll have an x-ray tomorrow." Indeed, this evening Jacob remembered for a long time. The injury really turned out to be serious, and the guy sat on the certificate for almost a month. But thanks to the temporary out of commission, his relationship with his girlfriend got better. Evelyn completely settled in Jacob's room, trying to surround him with attention and care. Frank watched the couple from the sidelines. I was frankly envious of them. Evelyn showed up 2 days after the incident, but she didn't go straight to Jacob to apologize for her injuries, but knock on Frank's room. "Do you forgive me for being like that then?" Frank invited a guest in, and I remained unharmed. Jacob was hurt. The girl blushed. "Honestly, I'm so embarrassed. And Nancy, we went to college with her. She is such a provocateur, started to pester me, but I didn't hold back." Frank wasn't interested in hearing Evelyn's excuses, but he remembered Sebastian's upset face. "It's good that you were wrong about what you did, but you better stop. Bad habits don't lead to anything good. They're nothing but trouble. I'll quit. Honestly, I'm sick of it myself. I'm acting like a fool. You don't have to do self-mobilization, but it's worth remembering the lesson. Think about your father. You're ruining his reputation with your actions." The girl looked at him for a long time and then cried. "Frank, thank you. You're so good, you understand, don't you? You know, I've never had a real friend." She looked at him so piercingly that he felt goosebumps involuntarily run through his body. If you want, I'll be your friend. The girl clutched at the suggestion, like a drowning man clutching at straws. I'd like that very much. I'll listen to you like a big brother. Evelyn smiled like a child. Frank looked at her with surprise. In front of him was not that powerful Evelyn, but a completely different girl, naive and vulnerable. At that moment, he forgot that not so long ago he had compared Evelyn to 1 million. Her sincere remorse had bought her up, and he wanted to believe that she would change for the better. Only a few days passed after the unpleasant incident, and Frank was unexpectedly summoned from a lecture. Frank urgently summoned you to the dean's office. The messenger was a student from the junior year, who immediately hurried off on his own. Frank caught up with him. Listen, do you know what I'm being summoned to the dean's office for? The kid shrugged his shoulders. No idea. I was asked and I passed it on. The kid headed for the faculty control center. As he walked in his head, the most fantastic versions popped up. But when he opened the massive door of the dean's office, he sighed with relief in his chair. Opposite the head of the faculty sat Maria's father. At the appearance of the young man, he stood up and extended his hand. It's good to see you, Frank. I felt it was my duty to meet you, because I am very grateful to you for your help in a delicate matter. Frank felt awkward and shifted from foot to foot. The dean made a sign to Evelyn's father and left. You two talk while I go about my business. After he left, Sebastian could speak more freely, but Frank felt uncomfortable that this old man was making excuses for his daughter's actions. You didn't look after my daughter. All business, work, goddamn it. My wife is also in a managerial position. So we grew a nettle of libido instead of a flower. The man was silent for a while, gathering his thoughts. Yesterday, I had a serious conversation with Evelyn, and she told me that you and Frank, her best friend. The young man was embarrassed, and Sebastian continued. There's no need to be embarrassed. Friendship is a good thing, and such a relationship is to be welcomed, especially since you're in good standing with the faculty. Tell me, Frank, have you already decided on your first job? The kid's got a lot of guts. Not yet. His answer pleased his interlocutor. That's fine. I promise to help you. What's your specialty? Surgery? Sebastian wrinkles his forehead, just as Evelyn did. I can't say, but I think there's an opening at Botkin. I'll check and let you know the other day. I'm sure the answer will be positive. I can't be refused in a hospital where I've worked for almost a quarter of a century. Sebastian kept his promise. The prospect of working in one of the best hospitals in the country opened up the strength of an aspiring doctor. My imagination was already drawing the most colorful pictures of the future. Evelyn, too, was diligently pouring balm on the boys' hearts. Frank, Daddy says you have a growth prospect there. Soon the superintendent will go on a well-deserved vacation, and you can take his place. Although it was nice to hear such speeches, Frank was sober about such remarks. Of course, I'm grateful to your father. But do not rush with predictions. The head of the department should be a man with experience, not yesterday's student. Frank, but you told me yourself you've done complicated surgeries before. I only assisted. That is, I studied. And that's not enough to become a real pro. Frank, don't be modest. You are the smartest, and you will succeed. Evelyn's participation was a pleasure. They met almost every day, and Frank was no longer annoyed by her presence. True, he did not feel particularly warm feelings for the girl either. Everything changed after Evelyn's parents invited the guy to visit. Frank had been working at the clinic for only 3 months and had already managed to get used to it. Evelyn usually met him after duty in her car. That fall evening, she was acting mysterious, and a young man asked, "Evelyn, did you throw something away again?" "Why would you say that?" "Because you have an expression like a cat who stole a sausage from the table." The girl burst out laughing, and Frank was afraid she was about to cause an accident. "Evelyn, watch the road. You don't make me laugh when I'm driving." The cat comparisons are great. I like it, but I have to disappoint you, because I'm a good girl now. I don't go to bars or get in fights. There's a reason I look happy. My folks wanted me to tell you they're expecting you to come over for a dinner party of sorts. Unexpected, but nice. Well, I'll accept the invitation when I'm in full dress. Tonight, which is now. Evelyn, but I'm coming straight from work. Why didn't you tell me this before? I should at least get changed, get cleaned up. Frank, I'm sorry, I forgot, it slipped my mind. If my mom hadn't reminded me today, we wouldn't have had dinner. Oh, don't worry about it. My ancestors were simple people, and I like you like that. The girl looked at him tenderly and began to hum a popular song. Love me, Frank had to put up with the unplanned visit. He listened to the singing, the girlfriend, without paying much attention to the content of the hit song. When they passed a flower store, he asked Evelyn to slow down here for a moment. Your mom, what kind of flowers does she prefer? Roses. He soon returned with a gorgeous bouquet of roses and a cake. Now we're in order. The evening in the family circle passed in a pleasant atmosphere. Sebastian told interesting stories from his life, and Molly looked after the guest as if the young man was a person of status. As if in between, the host started talking about his family and children. Frank, do not consider me ignorant, but how long are you going to be a bachelor? Frank did not expect such a question and almost choked on his salad. Evelyn made fearful eyes and looked at her father. Daddy, well, you can't have that kind of talk after dinner. The man replied with a nonchalant look. Did I ask about something forbidden? It's just an everyday question. Your mother and I were married when we were students. Didn't the superintendent want to give us our own room in the dormitory? Imagine, we lived separately for 6 months. And then, of course, everything settled down. Sebastian looked at his daughter, then at the young man. My point was that it's better to start a family while you're still young. You can't put it off, and you should have children at a young age. Evelyn blushed. Daddy, you're at it again. Maybe Frank has other plans. The girl looked hopefully at the boy, who had already realized what the girl's father was getting at. You're right, Sebastian. Perhaps it's time for us to think seriously about it. The man was immediately revitalized, and it is right to marry you as a young specialist will be allocated housing. And there, look, Charles will go on a well-deserved vacation, and I will recommend you for his place. The guest noted with surprise that the girl's father had switched to you. Silently former before Molly, also excessively hot, supported her spouse. We will definitely help you. And when the kids will go with pleasure, we will babysit the grandchildren. We have a villa near LA. The place is paradise and the air is wonderful. That evening, Frank was returning to the hostel, harassed and with the most contradictory feelings. He did not like that his fate for him so quickly and easily decided by Evelyn's parents. They hadn't even asked how he felt about their daughter. It was as if he'd been sold at the fair as a mere commodity. An unpleasant lump came to his throat, and Frank swore out loud. They married me without me. I feel sick to my stomach after this dinner. He regretfully remembered Jacob, who had gone to his hometown. No one to consult with. At first, he wanted to call his father, but then he changed his mind. He didn't want to burden old people with his problems. Yes, my father won't approve of me. He'll say I'm like a girl sold out to debt. Although in fact, that's where it's headed. For days, Frank was worried. He thought over various ways in which he could slip away from an unwanted marriage. But such a deed would cross out all his dreams. On the third day, the young man resigned himself to the fact that he would have to marry a girl he had no feelings for, stepping on the throat of his own pride. He went to the jewelry store to get a ring for his bride. From Maria's enthusiastic reaction, Frank realized that the girl had long expected him to take this step. She admired the ring with a shining stone in the center. How lovely! Also used such earrings for the set did not interfere. The young man was struck that the bride spoke of an expensive gift as something ordinary. As is customary in such cases, he solemnly asked his parents and Evelyn for his daughter's hand in marriage. But Sebastian even a little rudely cut him off Frank to nothing. Here vaudeville with dances to arrange, and everything is clear. We should think together when to set the wedding day. We will have to invite a lot of guests who have in their hands concentrated power. In the process of preparing for the upcoming wedding, the boy took almost no part. When he tried to object in his own inimitable way, Evelyn Frank spoke up. Why do you want to get involved in something you don't know anything about? You have your customs in the village, and we have ours here. My mom and dad will make it all right. Trust them. Evelyn, wait a minute. I'm not a Chinese moron who has to agree to everything. After all, my life is being decided and I want to be a part of it. The girl threw him an arrogant glare. I see that you are already practicing in this direction. In principle, I don't mind your independent decisions. But don't forget that Dad doesn't like to be contradicted. This remark only briefly cooled the young man's ardor. After the wedding, he also tried for a long time to convince himself that there was no one in the world who was happier than he was. That such sessions of self-soothing gave a short-term effect and then stopped working altogether. Frank was preparing for a scheduled surgery when Molly called. Her voice was vibrating with excitement and anxiety. "Frank, do you know where Evelyn is?" "I have no idea. I thought she was at your place. She ran out this morning, said she had something to do. It's just that I have a meeting this afternoon and there's no one to leave Andrew with." The man tried to remain calm, but his mind was working feverishly. "Evelyn didn't tell me anything about her business. I'm not even aware that she left Andrew with you. I'm sorry, but I have a patient in surgery on the table right now. I'll call you back in a couple hours." Molly screamed. So something clicked in Frank's ear. "Why are you calling me down? I can't wait. After all, Frank, it's your baby. Think of something." He wanted to crush everything in his path, but by sheer force of will, he held back. The charge nurse noticed the surgeon's confusion. "Frank, are you in trouble?" "Yes, but I can handle it." The woman gave him a motherly, warm look. "No, you can't. What can I do for you?" He summarized the problem, ending with the words, "My wife's parents are snobs." "What kind of snobs?" "They seem like decent, upstanding people. But in reality, Molly is perfectly capable of leaving the baby alone in the apartment. I dread to think how that might end up, and I can't leave work at the moment." Christina listened to the doctor without interrupting. Then she offered an address. "Let me ask my daughter to pick up your little boy." "Yeah, it's awkward. It's kind of awkward. The doctor sleeps on the ceiling because the blanket falls down. My Emily's on vacation. She's got nothing to do anyway. Call Molly." Christina's unexpected help came in handy, but although the doctor had calmed down a little, his hands were still trembling. In such a state, it was impossible to approach the operating table. The more so the tremor of his hands could be noticed by his colleagues, which would mean suspension from the operation. To finally get rid of the effects of stress, Frank took 10 deep breaths and only then confidently headed to the opera block. It was one of the most difficult days in his practice. The surgeries weren't complicated. The kind surgeons perform every day, but even during them, all the young surgeon's thoughts were somewhere far away. He berated himself for the 1,000th time for his inability to stand up to his wife and her parents. As soon as he made a remark to Evelyn, she would immediately say, "Frank, I'm with you, and I'll take Andrew away." He tried to find unanimity in this matter with his father-in-law, but he firmly held his daughter's side. Frank needs to be gentle with a woman in heat is very sensitive. She is not used to such abuse. Frank could not open up to his parents because he knew how his father would triumph. "Did you see what you took? Now let him come out. No one forced you to marry the boss's daughter. You got yourself into this bondage." He had to hear James say something like that once, so he avoided talking to his father about it. Of course, his mother would understand and pity him, but he didn't want to upset her. The most deplorable was that his family troubles began to affect his work. And it was only 4 years after the wedding. Frank had barely waited 5 hours. Emily, the head nurse's daughter, brought Andrew to the clinic. The man was already familiar with her, so he greeted her from afar. "It's good to see you, Emily. And thank you so much for your help. Andrew must have been driving you around." The girl smiled. "Not at all. He and I were having a lot of fun. We had a very fun and interesting time. Then we took a walk, ate and slept. You could say that we didn't deviate from the regimen that babies of that age should have." The boy obviously liked the company of the volunteer nanny because he did not want to leave the car. Then Emily suggested that I give you a ride home. The man was confused. "Of course, I do not mind, although also on their own wheels do not want to leave the car here until morning. Believe me, nothing will happen. I've checked it with my own experience. If you're so worried, you can catch up tonight. Do you live far away?" "No, I'm almost in the center." You talked me into it, Emily." The young woman drove the car not only confidently, but even beautifully. Frank admired her precise movements. "If it's no secret, you've been driving for a long time. Didn't your mom tell you?" "No. It's amazing. She likes to brag about her daughter. I mean, I was a racing driver for a while. I really didn't want to make it in Formula One, but it didn't work out in that sport. It's still gender discrimination. Emily, you can judge me, but I am also strongly against the beautiful half of humanity to expose themselves to any risk. After all, a woman's purpose is to love and give her love to others." Beautifully put. I will not argue with you because I myself have already realized that not every wish should be fulfilled. Frank, may I ask you a follow-up question? Of course. Why don't you enroll your son in kindergarten? The boy is just at the age where he's developing his first social skills. Preschool is optimal for that. You know, Emily, you've unintentionally touched on a sensitive subject. The thing is, my wife's parents don't want to hear about preschool. My father-in-law says that daycare is bad for the child's psyche. It's completely stupid, bordering on idiotic. However, by the behavior of your Molly, it was easy to understand what kind of environment your son is brought up in. Of course, it's none of my business. But grandmothers are not always good mechanics and educators. Frank wanted to have a serious talk with his wife that same evening, but Maria showed up well past midnight, and she could barely stand on her feet. The incidents of his wife coming home in a disorderly state began to recur with surprising regularity. The man tried all means to put his wife on the path of correction, but Evelyn became increasingly rude to him and even complained to her father that her husband was being aggressive towards her. The reaction from her father-in-law followed immediately. "Frank, I thought better of you. I never expected you to become a family despot." This injustice angered Frank. He couldn't help himself and raised his voice at the test. "Sebastian, can't you see that your daughter leads, to put it mildly, inappropriate for a decent woman lifestyle? Don't you talk about my daughter like that. You think you've come out of the mud and become a respectable man. I treat him like my own son. You didn't expect me to thank you so much for my kindness, did you, Frank? Sebastian, I'm very grateful to you. But this isn't about me. Evelyn's an idle fool. She should at least get a job." And then the father-in-law didn't let his son-in-law finish his thought. He jumped up like a scalded man, began to pour shame on his husband's head, his daughter's head. "Aren't you ashamed to say such things? Evelyn is not only your wife, she's also the mother of your son. You owe her a normal life, not a piece of bread. What are you talking about? Can't you see that your daughter is a very bad mother? Not to mention she's not a good wife. And you know it yourself, Sebastian. I may have put my kid in daycare, but I'm not worried about him. So you're saying you can't even trust the arena with your own child? You're right. That's exactly what I was trying to tell you." This confession struck my father-in-law so hard that he hissed, "Go away, get out of my sight. You will regret your words." After this conversation, the already strained relations between Frank and his wife's parents became even worse by an order of magnitude. Molly stopped calling them in the evenings to ask how their grandson's day was going. Sebastian ignored his son-in-law too, when the old head of the department took a well-deserved retirement. A young doctor who hadn't even worked at the clinic for a year was appointed to the position. Frank realized that his life was in a dark place. He became irritable, and he wasn't sleeping well. It was all affecting his work. A cloud was gathering over the surgeon's head. When 2 patients he was operating on died 2 days apart. Predictably, he was summoned to the chief physician. The conversation with the head of the clinic was short. He did not listen to the doctor's explanations, and with undisguised contempt, demanded that tomorrow morning I have your explanatory note on my desk. This is an unheard of emergency for our clinic. Alex, but one patient had an age contraindication, so the possibility of death was not out of the question. But come on, Frank, blame it on people who can't defend themselves. If you weren't sure of the outcome, why did you do it? The relatives demanded it, and they were warned and even gave written consent. None of that matters now. You see, your arguments are irrelevant. 2 deaths at once. The second patient had comorbidities. The chief physician started spinning his eyes wildly. What kind of an asshole are you? Do you know that the relatives of these patients sue? The surgeon with a stride pronounced. And I did not harm anyone. No doctor is immune from such cases. He abruptly turned around and left the chief's office. When he returned to the department, he immediately noticed that some of his colleagues looked at him with sympathy, and some looked with obvious gloating. There was no one in the resident's room, and he breathed a sigh of relief. At least I could get my thoughts together. But not 5 minutes later, the door opened gently. "Frank, may I?" "Yes, Christina, come in." The older sister stood in the middle of the office, hesitant to say anything important. "Well, why don't you keep quiet and tell us what else has happened?" The woman in one breath said the chief ordered to cancel all your scheduled surgeries. Even so. "Well, thank you, Christina, for the warning." Frank didn't expect his big sister to pay up. She looked at the young surgeon with that uniquely maternal warmth. "Frank, don't despair. The sun will come out and the clouds will scatter. So will those who like to dig holes for others. I even know where that wind came from." Apparently, the woman wanted to share her hunches with him. But he asked warningly, "Please, Christina, don't cry." He sat up late into the evening, filling out his medical history. It was as if he had a premonition that he'd have to turn things in soon. Molly called to say she'd already picked Andrew up from daycare, so he could take his time getting home. It was already dark when he left the hospital. Frank headed towards the parking lot where he had parked his car earlier that morning, and suddenly noticed his wife's car on the other side of the street. The thought slipped in, why did Maria come? She knows I'm in my car. He had to cross to the opposite side of the street to find out. With a measured stride, he made his way to his wife's car. But what he saw left him stunned. Evelyn was in the car not alone, but with a strange man. And they were clearly not chatting in the back seat of the car without realizing it. Frank jerked open the car door with a jerk. He could no longer control his actions and only growled like a wounded animal. His wife's lover was the first to fly out of the cabin onto the asphalt. He landed hard and wailed in pain. Frank wanted to extract his wife in the same way, but she scrambled into a corner and screamed, "Frank, what are you doing?" "Nothing happened between us. It's just an acquaintance of mine," he only remarked with a sneer. "I wonder how many acquaintances you have." He didn't want to find out the circumstances of the secret meeting between the two friends, so he hurried to leave the scene. When he arrived at Evelyn's parents' house to pick up Andrew, Molly wouldn't let him into the apartment. "From this day forward, Frank, you're not allowed to see your son." "Who decided that?" "We did, and the courts will confirm it." Sebastian showed up behind his wife's back. "You still have the nerve to show up here? Do you even know who you hurt? You're not going to get away with this. You should be in a hospital if you think you're cheating around every corner. People were just talking in the car, and you ran over and hit a man." Yeah, sure, it was a nice conversation they had. Frank had never been much for hard liquor. But that night, for the first time in his life, he drank himself into oblivion. For almost 3 months, Frank was staying with Christina. The day after he caught his wife in the act of infidelity, the man filed for divorce. When his father-in-law found out about it, he set in motion all the mechanisms of revenge. The first blow followed immediately. He was summoned again by the chief physician, Mister. "My patience is wearing thin. Turns out you've got a family history of violence, sending lives to your wife, but that sacrifice isn't enough for you. You also avoid ordinary passersby. What do you say to that? You're going to start making up stories again. You're the one telling me lies, Alex. You've been given distorted information. I looked at him for a long time. You still don't get it. I feel sorry for you. Frank, you're a good specialist. You could have made a career, but let's not waste time. Right now, you've got a very bad card, a man beaten and 2 deaths. Although your direct guilt has yet to be proven, you can't argue with the facts. In short, I'm giving you the option of resigning at will, and if I don't accept it, in that case, the investigation will continue. Do you know that this could lead to a professional ban? I'm sure you're not prepared for that." The chief medical officer was right, and Frank had to take that option. He immediately wrote a statement in his office. "Alex warned, and please hurry up and vacate the apartment. We are expecting new specialists, and they will need a place to live." Evelyn hadn't had time to move her things out yet because she didn't know he'd filed for divorce. Frank was quick with the packing and left his wife a short note. "Live your life as you know it. I'll meet you in court." The first few days he felt like an athlete who was not allowed to start. Of course, there were attempts to find a job in his specialty at least part-time, but they all ended in complete failure. He was greeted with joy, assuring him that surgeons were in great demand. But when he came again, they sadly said sorry, but there were no vacancies. "I haven't given up hope of finding a job." Frank offered I'd take the ER job. But even there, they didn't want to see a doctor with a damaged reputation. Being in a state of complete despair, the young man decided to call a friend. Jacob at first even pleased Frank. "Do not realize how glad I am to hear from you. How are you doing? It's not important. I need your help. Okay, I'll be in La in a couple of days, then we'll talk." Frank was literally counting down the hours until he could meet his classmates. As promised, Jacob called right away. They met the same night. But as Frank told his friend about his troubles, his face grew increasingly grim. "Look, Frank, I'm not going to lie to you, but right now, I can hardly help you. You do realize what a practitioner's reputation means, right?" "Yeah, you're right. I guess my case is hopeless." I'm sorry to bother Frank from behind. Hurry to the exit of the cafe where the friends decided to meet. Jacob caught up with him almost on the way out. "Wait, we haven't talked. It's been so long." "Jacob, we've already talked, and I get it. I don't want you to accidentally get yourself dirty. My sterile reputation is far more important than my friendship. Goodbye." His last hope was gone, and only the gloom of the unknown awaited him. He could not burden Christina with his presence, though she and Emily tried to help him in any way they could without saying a word to these two wonderful women. He went to the station. For almost 24 hours, Frank shook in a common carriage of the train. He didn't want to think about anything. He just watched the passengers. There was no money even for tea. That's why by the end of the journey his stomach was cramping from hunger. When the young man appeared on the threshold of the native house, his parents could not recover for a long time. Kelly looked into the haggard face of his son and whispered, "Frank, you don't look like yourself. What's the matter with you?" "Son." James was silent. Of course, the atmosphere was not conducive to conversation, and Frank waited for a convenient moment. 2 days passed, and his father decided it was time to set the record straight. "Frank, let's go to the garage. I need your help." He was well aware that this was a common technique his father used to deflect attention, but he followed his parent when they were alone. James asked stiffly, "Let's get it straight. What's your problem?" For almost 2 hours, Frank had been talking about his life, and his father had not stopped him once, although his expression changed. Then his father turned on the machine for some reason and started working on a part. Only after finishing the work, the man said, "Yes, the situation is stalemate. But as wise people say, whatever is done is for the best. I told you before, son, that California life is spoiling. We're country folk. We're not cut out for it. Hence all your troubles. But you mustn't despair. I'm sure there will be a job for you in your native village." Frank felt somewhat relieved. He had thought that his father would scold him, but James had said something different. Most importantly, his father promised support. Although there was a severe staff shortage in the district health service, the young doctor was regarded with wariness. The head of the department studied his documents for a long time. At some point, Frank thought that the official would taste or smell his diploma a little out of pride. The bureaucrat limited himself to the standard procedure and a question. "Frank, tell me honestly, why did you give up practicing in the... it's prestigious to work in a clinic." The applicant for the position of surgeon in the outpatient clinic had all the answers prepared in advance. "I really did not want to leave the clinic, but I had to do it for family reasons. The fact is that after I divorced my wife, I had no place to live, and hence all the resulting problems." The official was satisfied with the answer, but felt it necessary to warn the new doctor. "But we have no housing stock, so you will have to deal with this issue on your own." "There's nothing wrong with that. I will live with my parents." The interviewer was pleased. "So you're from around here?" "Yes. My parents have lived in the village all their lives, and I went to school. But in that case, I have no more questions for you. You can check in and get to work. But Frank must warn you that we often have irregular working hours. You know, we're short-staffed. I've already been warned, so I'm ready to work for 2 if necessary. But it's one thing to say it, but it's another to face reality head-on. On his first day on the job, Frank realized that everything they teach at university is far from real life. The small staff of the rural dispensary rejoiced at the arrival of a new doctor. The head nurse, Nina, who dealt with all the organizational issues, immediately said, "Frank for rocking time, no time, so in look at once and for a long time." He asked with a smile, "Explain more about what it means." It's simple. You'll be seeing patients, making house calls to the bedridden. Because our car broke down. You'll also be on duty and the X-ray machine. Frank objected. I agree with all of that. Besides the last one, to work on modern equipment, you have to finish the appropriate courses and get a permit. Nina looked at him as if he were hopelessly ill. Forget about standards. We're on a different planet here. And you don't mention modern equipment in vain either. Our X-ray machine should be in a museum. And it works. John, the paramedic from the ambulance, will explain and show you everything. He used to run the office, and then his job was cut. That's the way it is. 2 months. Frank's getting used to working in a new place. He didn't expect to face a whole set of difficulties in a rural outpatient clinic. The only upside was the patient's compliance. The patients literally absorbed every word the doctor said. In LA, he met a completely different attitude towards the representatives of his profession. So step by step, Frank understood village life, trying at the same time to determine his place in it. One day in the middle of the night, the phone rang. Kelly rushed to the phone, but immediately handed the receiver to her son, who came out of his room. "Frank, the nurse on duty is asking for you." He picked up the phone and heard the excited voice of a young nurse. "Frank, you are scheduled to be on duty today, so I called you. We've got a situation. I don't know what to do." The first time I encountered this by the breaking voice and sobs in it was not difficult to guess that the girl is crying. As sternly as possible, Frank said, "Immediately stop the hysterics and to business. Report what happened." The girl already more calmly reported, "Here one mommy brought a girl, and she is suffocating. She's a little girl about a year old." 2. "Doctor, what should I do first?" "Calm down yourself. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The surgeon's timing was a little off because it took him only 3 minutes to get to the outpatient clinic. At first glance, he realized that the baby's condition was critical. The child's face took on a blue hue, and every breath was accompanied by wheezing. The doctor turned to the mother, who was frozen in fright. "How often do you have these attacks?" "First time Jenna had a fever for a couple days, and tonight she started choking." "That's okay. We're going to get her some help." "Unfortunately, I'm not a pediatrician, but I'm sure we can handle it." Frank gave commands to the nurse, and the nurse followed them diligently. After the IV injection, the girl was breathing almost normally. Frank did not let the small hand of the child from his hand and quietly said, "Well, the danger is over. Now Jenna will fall asleep. Tomorrow she will wake up quite healthy. At least that's what we'll hope." "Frank, thank you." These words of gratitude from the girl's mother left the doctor stunned. While he was giving the child emergency treatment, he didn't pay attention to the girl's mother. And here were such words. He looked carefully at the crying woman. "Maria, you didn't recognize me. Apparently, I've changed a lot. No, I just didn't expect to see you again. And especially under these circumstances, no offense. I really didn't have time for that." "What are you saying, Frank?" "How could I take offense at the man who just saved my child? My clumsy life must have taken its toll on the machine. I've just recently moved back to my home village, separated from my husband. Coincidences like that happen. But I also separated from my wife. By the way, my son Andrew is almost the same age as your daughter." There were no more common topics of conversation, and the situation wasn't exactly suitable for a heart-to-heart talk. So Frank was advised by an old acquaintance, "Let her sleep in her sleep, all illnesses pass." "Frank, what else can I do to make Jenna get better quickly?" He laughed lightly. "Sing her a lullaby. It's the most effective remedy." The doctor carefully closed the door of the room behind her, and soon a melodious tune was heard. The simple song was mesmerizing in its simple words and sounds. Several times Frank still came to the door of the ward and listened to his mother's chants. The young nurse looked at the ward with understanding at how beautifully she was singing, like a real singer. The doctor smiled. Every mother, for the sake of her child, is ready to become an artist and a warrior. That is why there is nothing in the world more beautiful than a mother's lullaby. Molly, you please keep an eye on them. I'm going home. I'll try to be home early in the morning. The girl nodded her head in agreement. Of course, Frank, you need to rest, don't you? When the doctor arrived at the outpatient clinic in the morning, he was met by a distraught nurse, Molly. Did something happen again? Yes, Frank, I just went out for a minute to process the instruments. And when you came back, Mom and the girls were gone. Our janitor, Uncle Cinny, said they were gone in some silver car. Frank had an involuntary outburst. She's out of her mind. The baby is so heavy. Molly is a friend, not a favor. There's an address on the chart. The nurse immediately replied with astonishment that there was no such address. This woman brought the girl herself at night, and they were in a car. Maybe she's not one of ours. Molly is one of ours. I know that for a fact. Of course, I'm sorry you didn't see it coming. But if the mother chose to, the child's life is her responsibility. Frank soon forgot the unusual little patient. Only sometimes the melody of an old lullaby would come to mind. Work took up a lot of time and energy, and Frank simply did not notice how time flew by. Before he knew it, 6 months had already passed. He took some time off and went to the city. Of course, his former relatives are unlikely to welcome him, but it's his Andrew's birthday. And if they wouldn't let him see his son, at least let them give him presents. On the way out, he hatched a plan. What if he went to the daycare center? He knew all the nannies, so he was sure that at least for a minute to see Andrew he would be allowed. At least to look at him sleeping. That's good. The teacher looked at him in surprise. But Andrew hasn't been going to kindergarten for almost 6 months. Frank wrinkled his nose like a toothache. Of course, he had to think about the fact that as soon as Daddy was out of Andrew's life, no one would take him to the garden either. Thank you. Excuse me. Is everything all right? Yeah, if I may say so. My wife and son are divorced. They won't let me see them. The teacher sighed. It's the worst. When a child is used as a means of revenge. Good luck to you. Frank said thank you sincerely. There was nothing to do. He had to go to Evelyn's parents. He really hoped that the door would not be slammed in his face. He stood there for a while, collecting his thoughts and thinking of what to say. Then he pressed the bell. The door was opened by the owner of the apartment. He didn't look well, either tired or sick. Sebastian, hello. I realize you hate to see me, but it's Andrew's birthday. Let me at least give him a present and a hug. Frank was silent, expecting a refusal or a scolding in return. His former father-in-law sighed and opened the door wide. Hoda Frank. He saw Andrew at once. The boy had lost weight. He was slouching, and he looked very sad for his birthday. Andrew, the child turned his head slowly, as if you couldn't believe his voice was real. And then Daddy screamed and rushed over to him. He wrapped his skinny arms around Frank, and Frank even dropped the presents from the swell of their feelings. Sunny to Sunny, Molly appeared from the room. She looked surprised at Frank, then at her husband, and said in a quiet voice, "Hello, Frank." He got up from his knees, and while Andrew unwrapped the gift, looked at the former relatives in surprise. I don't understand what happened. Molly threw a quick glance at her husband, and the latter said, "Come on, Frank, let's have tea." "Yeah, we'll talk." Everything was so incomprehensible that Frank was completely confused. He just didn't understand what was going on. Molly poured tea, put a piece of cake in front of each of them. Frank waited. Then Sebastian spoke. "I should probably apologize to you. It's bad enough when the crown is weighing down your head, keeping you from thinking." Frank's eyebrows went up. He didn't expect such words at all. Meanwhile, the ex-father-in-law continued. "As soon as you left, Evelyn flashed Andrew at us, and she was carried away. Of course, I realized that everything you told me was true. But I was so tired of my daughter's behavior. I didn't want to get involved in any of this again. Besides, you're a father now. You know what blood means, don't you? Everyone else is to blame but their own blood. Grigory fundamentally disagreed with this position, but did not argue. He decided to listen to Sebastian. It was very strange that Molly did not interfere at all. So, for a month, she hung around. I've been repossessing the car. I've hired people to pick her up and bring her home, all to no avail. That day I said I would send her to a clinic for treatment because I wasn't sure she was only using booze, and Evelyn ran away. While we were at work, she stole a car, leaving Andrew alone at home. As luck would have it, both Molly and I stayed home late, arriving late and finding my grandson unconscious. He was apparently crying at first, then he got really scared. In general, Andrew has been having nightmares since then. With even the smallest shock, he starts gasping for air until he passes out. We went with him to the hospital. We left the child there. His grandmother stayed with him, and I decided to find my negligent daughter and give her a good kicking. I arrived at the bar a few minutes late and was told that Evelyn had just driven downtown a few minutes ago in a deranged state. I went after her. I was ready to kill her, but again I didn't make it. Evelyn had too much to drink. She just lost control of the car. She skidded and drove it into a bus stop. Unfortunately, there were people at the bus stop, all very seriously injured. Maria was hurt the most. Some piece of the stop fell on her head. She's had several surgeries. She'll walk, even talk. But our daughter is now a vegetable and her development is much less. Andrew again. Frank's hair stirred on his head. He couldn't even say anything. Our troubles didn't end there. Everything came out. Too many people got hurt. I was asked out of the ministry and Molly out of her job. But you realize it's a different kind of money. Molly can't go to work because Evelyn will be discharged home in 2 weeks. The doctor honestly told us that our daughter will not have a long life, but she may very well live 5 years or even 10. As you realize, we can't give our daughter away for one reason. Whatever she is our daughter, we love her, and we will try to be there for her as long as we can. We don't have any money left. All our savings have gone to compensate the victims. Sebastian lowered his head. Frank had forgotten all his resentments at once. At the beginning of the story, he had thought about his skill, but he had forgotten it immediately. Sebastian. Wait, Frank, I'm not finished yet. Molly and I had a conversation not long ago, and we decided to go to you ourselves. Although I was sure you'd show up for your son's birthday, that's why we didn't go right after we talked. I'm going to ask you to pick up Andrew. You realize there's going to be stuff in the house soon that he doesn't need to see. And right now, in the position he's in, it's dangerous. You're a doctor. You can help him. And then they'd say they were ashamed to go outside. Frank, gritting his teeth. But can you do that? It's no wonder Andrew feels that way. He's just crushed by these walls. When they drove out of town, the boy's eyes widened. Oh, so many places. Frank smiled. Oh wait, when we get home, you'll see what real beauty means. When Frank pulled up in front of the house, Kelly came right out to them. Oh Frank, it's good to have you back. They're just stitching things up at the nurse's station without you. Nina's been asking when you're coming. What's the big deal? You gave me 4 months' paychecks. You can't imagine how crazy the men are, drinking, fighting, breaking each other's bones. You're not alone. No, Mom, here, meet me. You'll know. Kelly had only seen Andrew a few times, but she sent gifts to town regularly. Evelyn hated coming here. She'd been to town once herself. It was problematic for her parents, too. So it turned out that they met either on Andrew's birthday or before New Year's Eve. No way. Grandson. She rushed to the men at Andrew's, picked him up on the arm. Grandson, dear. Father, look who's here to see us. James appeared on the porch, a newspaper in his hand, glasses pushed up on his forehead. Oh, it's Andrew. He tossed the paper aside and let me see him. But let me look at you. You've gotten so big. I took my glasses and took a closer look at you. Andrew, smiling, pushed his glasses back on his grandfather's nose. Frank knew perfectly well that his father had said that on purpose. He hadn't complained about his memory yet, but Andrew was already laughing merrily with his grandfather. They had no sooner entered the house when they saw Nina rushing to their house. "I've been calling and calling. No one answers. I thought Frank was back. Hello." She couldn't catch her breath. Then she blurted out, "Frank." Four people came in with serious injuries. Our people are torn from moneylessness at all. There was no money bad appeared. They drink. They have no mind. "Minna, I got it. Now I'll change my clothes and I'll be there. Thank you. And I'll run. Because my young girls don't know what to do at all." Frank fully felt what it means to give long-awaited paychecks to working people. The flow of trauma patients had been going on for about 2 weeks. And by the end of these 2 weeks came mostly those whose wives could not stand it, more drunk to lead their husbands. One man came in with a severe concussion and a fractured arm. Told that his wife brought him up with a frying pan, and the frying pan broke and his arm and got to his head. Vowed to both his wife and the doctors that he would never drink again. Frank smiled quietly because that man's wife was small, skinny, barely reaching her husband's shoulder. After working so hard, he came home and just collapsed to sleep. First day off in 2 weeks fell the next day. Woke up late this morning. Immediately saw Andrew, who was sitting next to him and waiting for him to wake up. Scolded himself mentally. How could he do that? He had brought the child and left him with his parents. Of course, they are his own, his grandparents. But Andrew doesn't know them that well. But the boy looked fine. There was even a blush on his cheeks, and the sadness was gone from his eyes. Frank quietly said hi. "Are you like Andrew?" quietly answered. "Hi, Daddy. I'm fine. Why are you whispering? Why are you whispering?" They laughed. Mother came into the room. "But can't you sleep?" Frank jumped out of bed. Who was the last one to brush his teeth? Andrew, with a smile, watched Frank fooling around, brushing his teeth and splashing in the water. And Frank turned to him. "That's it, you lose." "No, I brushed my teeth a long time ago. So I won." Frank laughed. "You're such a bug." He picked up his son and surrounded him across the room. Andrew squealed, screaming to kick, and laughed. Mother frowned, put the child in his place. Breakfast should be breakfast, and you only shook him once. Andrew was already in the 7th grade when he turned to his father with a request, "Dad, and can you take me on duty?" Frank looked at him in surprise. "Why?" Andrew answered evasively, "Well, I can't tell you exactly. I want to see how everything is." "So you're already thinking about choosing a profession?" Frank smiled. I wonder when his son managed to grow up. It seems like they've only recently arrived. Well, you could say that. We had an argument at school. Some people say it's cool to be a doctor, and others say it's no big deal because it's hard and thankless. What do you say to that? Frank thought about it like never before. Such thoughts never occurred to him. You know, son, you should want to treat people, to help them. Then the work will be a joy. And if you don't like the profession, nothing good can come of it. I'll take you on duty, of course. Get ready. Their nurse's station was a big hospital now. How big? It wasn't bigger, but the area that was assigned to the hospital had increased. Small medical stations in the villages were closing down, and everyone joined them. There was more work. They added a children's ward, and Frank became head doctor. Not as prestigious as in Lay, of course, but he was highly respected here because of the catastrophic shortage of staff. He was still on call. It was a day off, quiet, and Frank saw that his son was getting bored. Wanted already to suggest him to go home. Then Nina came in. "Frank, they brought in a sick woman who's in a bad way." Frank got up and went to the emergency room. Andrew followed him. They had an agreement that if something happens, Andrew doesn't ask anything on the sidelines. No messing around. On the couch lay a pale young woman with overly pale skin. Frank immediately realized that there was blood loss. It turned out that the woman lived in a local dormitory and stood up for her neighbor when her husband was chasing her. Don't call the cops on him. He's a good man. He just can't drink. And then he got fired from his job. So he got drunk. Frank looked her over. Yeah, things were bad, if not really bad. Big loss. Plus it looks like there's internal injuries. Let's get in already. Get a blood panel and get her to the OR right away. The woman stared at him for a moment, then she said, "Please save me. Because I have a cat at home a long time ago sin, so did not work. It is one thing to darn someone, and another thing real, complex operations. 4 hours later, he came out. Andrew looked at him in admiration. Dad, everyone says that if it wasn't for you, that woman would have died. Frank looked at him tiredly. It's a good thing it was me then. Frank knew that no doctor in his hospital would have been able to handle this surgery. Not because he wanted to praise himself, but simply because their level of training was different. The next day, he went to see the patient. She looked at him with sad eyes. I don't have anyone. Please ask someone to go to my house, even just to let the cat out. He'd starve to death. At least he'll have something to eat. He wrote down the address, took Kate's keys, and drove to the dormitory. Frank already knew that Kate had come here to work as a technologist in a factory that had recently been restarted. She had been assigned a room where she lived with the cat. The cat sat in the middle of the room on a table, looking at Frank, disgruntled and yelling loudly. But what friend? How could such a handsome cat be thrown out on the street? Get ready to go to our place. Frank himself didn't understand why he was doing this. Something had caught his eye about Kate, some kind of purity in her eyes. Another day passed. Frank went back on duty. I went straight to Kate's. Your cat will stay at my house for the time being, as soon as you get better, and then you can take it away. The woman had tears in her eyes. Thank you so much, Timothy. It's the only thing I have. Frank, who was on his way out, crouched beside her bed. What about your parents? What about friends? Kate shrugged. My parents were gone. When I was 15, they came up with me late. And my grandparents were gone already too. My aunt took me in, not because she had a lot of love for me, but because I couldn't be bad in front of people. Honestly, I would have been better off in an orphanage. She said Frank imagined how much Katya had suffered. He looked at her carefully, caught himself thinking that Kate had a very beautiful forehead and lips and nose. Even jerked his head. What's he, this young woman, is barely 25, and he's already 37, soon older for her. I'm old. But he came into the room more and more often. Kate was pleased and embarrassed at the same time when he came, and Frank felt like a schoolboy. The mother noticed that her son was strange and, of course, backed him up against the wall. Frank, why don't you introduce us? Who made you so happy? Frank was embarrassed. Mom, you think I'm perfectly ordinary. Here he was ratted out by his own son, who was now a frequent visitor to the hospital. He was determined to become a surgeon. Grandma, Dad saved a pretty woman from death, and now he spends all his free time in her room. Frank exhaled. Andrew, you're so full of shit. The son looked at him carefully. Mommy's daddy's gone for a long time now. Maybe it's time for you to get married. Our teacher told us in class that everything is connected. If a person doesn't have a soulmate, they are incomplete because they are only half a person. Kelly and Frank laughed. So you're saying that I'm not me, but only half of me? Andrew was confused for only a second. Yeah, it's a scientific fact. Whether Frank decided to heed his son's advice, or for some other reason, they got married 6 months later. Kate turned out to be exactly what he'd always dreamed of. Andrew was going to university. Of course, Frank was just as nervous as his son. So he traveled to LA with his son. They stayed with Sebastian and Molly. Evelyn's parents had fallen apart since her death. Frank looked at them now and didn't recognize them. Elderly, grief-stricken people, nothing about them resembled the ones that had thrown him out of his metropolitan life. The exams were over. We'll have the results tomorrow. Son, let's go for a walk. Are we taking pictures for the painting? Let's go. They wandered around Old LA for a long time. Andrew ran out for ice cream, and Frank sat down in the park. Frank, he turned around in surprise. There was a woman standing in front of him. Not exactly downcast, but very close to it. I'm sorry, we know each other. Frank knew perfectly well that we were acquainted. But how didn't you know? You were in Lullaby once. Frank awed. She nodded and sat down next to him. How are you doing, Frank? I see you're doing okay. I'm fine. How are you? Why did you run away from the hospital? I was stupid, so I ran away. My ex-husband came. I called him in a panic. I was scared. so he said he'd take us to the clinic. Anyway, he made it look bad. So it was my fault that the baby almost died. He quickly revoked my parental rights and took my daughter away. I tried to sue for a while, tried to get my kid back. It didn't work. After all these years, I don't know where she is or what happened to her. Frank listened and realized that few women could survive such a blow. Maria couldn't either. Maria, can I help you with something? Well, how can you help me? I don't need anything from you now. You realize that. It's just inertia. Where do you live? Maria grinned. You know, the abandoned factory at the exit of this neighborhood. I've seen it. That's where I live. A lot of people like me live there. She got up to leave. Andrew was approaching them. But Frank got up too. Maria, no offense. Don't think you'll take money and not find your daughter. No, now you don't need her to see her mom down. No need. Let her think I'm gone. Thanks for the money. I can sleep when I'm drunk. I don't want to dream about Jenna. Frank looked at her and once again thought how strange life was. How strangely, she disposes of fates, sparing no one. In the morning, it was announced that Andrew had been admitted. What he'd done, how he'd screamed and jumped. And Molly was wiping her tears. Well done, grandson. We're so glad Frank realized that they were glad they didn't have to spend the evenings alone. Both of them were no longer working, and Frank could see how hard it was for them to be alone. Andrew's departure coincided with another event. As soon as the train started, Andrew absolutely refused to be driven by his father. Kate took his hand. Frank, we need to talk. He looked at his wife in surprise. She'd been a bit mysterious lately, and he wanted to talk to her himself. Let's talk, of course. Honestly, he was afraid that Katya would get some other crazy idea in her head. She really wanted a baby. She had a great relationship with Andrew, but like any woman, she wanted a little one, and it wasn't working out. Frank, of course, had helped with the fast track and the checkup. He has a son. It turns out Kate was the problem. But the doctors said everything was fine. Kate's been reacting more and more violently to the fact that it's not working out. She's been taking herbs, only letting him in the bedroom on certain days. Now he was trying to guess what else she had in mind. They sat down on a bench. The weather was nice. A little sad about Andrew's departure, but Kate was even more worried now. She was too mysterious. Frank, here's the thing. He wanted to shake his wife, but he waited patiently. We're having a baby. Frank opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, then surrounded her. He no longer thought or waited. On their due date, they had a beautiful baby girl. When Kate and their daughter were brought home, the whole family lined up around the crib. Even Andrew took himself off school. For such an event, she's so beautiful. She's so tiny. Oh, she's wrinkling her nose. Andrew was most impressed. Wow, I have a sister, and such a tiny one at that. Andrew spent all his free time at home with Nancy. Kate laughed. Andrew, when you come over, I don't feel like a mother anymore. You take it right away. I have that title. Andrew only laughed. He was the one who made Nancy make the first move and was terribly proud of it. And one day, when the vacations were coming up and the whole family was getting ready to meet Andrew, he called and said, Dad, well, I'm not coming alone. I'm bringing the fiancé to meet. Frank thought he had misheard. His son's a kid. What a bride. But Kate reminded him with a smile that Andrew had moved on to fourth year. Life had surprised them again. The day Andrew and the girl were to arrive, sick Nancy dragged an ice cream cone to the freezer, and while her mother was out of sight, quickly paid it off. Kate saw it when only horns and legs were left, scolded him, of course. Always nudged him a little and made sure the daughter ate small bites, but here she didn't see it coming. By lunchtime, the fever had risen, and Andrew was due to arrive in the evening. Frank liked the girl, dressed simply without any newfangled frankness. Long braid. You could see the intelligent eyes were attentive. She was a third-year student at the same university as Andrew, but in a different direction. They were sitting at the table, and Kate couldn't get Nancy down. The fever was down, and nothing should hurt so much. They gargled her throat. It was less painful, but the daughter kept whimpering and hinting at them. Even Andrew wasn't interested in her today. Jenna was the name of the son's girlfriend approached Kate. "Can I try it?" Kate was surprised but handed Nancy to her. The girl was quiet for a moment, staring at the stranger. Then she was about to cry. But then Jenna softly sang a lullaby. She sang very beautifully. Andrew's eyebrows went up. It was obvious that he did not know about such talents of his bride. Frank froze at the first words of the lullaby. It was the same lullaby Maria sang to her daughter. And her name was Jenna too. Nancy fell fast asleep, and Jenna returned to the table. "Jenna, tell me, what's your mom's name?" Jenna sighed. "Her name is Maria. She's from around here, by the way. That's all I know about her. Dad used to say she left me. Just before he died, he admitted that Mom was dead. I don't know why he made it up, but he was a very peculiar man. He loved me, of course, but his love made it hard for me to breathe." Frank drew more air into his chest. "When did she die?" "You don't know, not for sure. My dad said I was just a little girl." Frank exhaled noisily. "But that's not true." The girl flinched and looked at him. "Did you know my mom?" "I did. And even as a teenager, I was in love with her." Kate's eyebrows went up. Andrew opened his mouth. James quacked. "And then, when you were about 2 years old, she came to our hospital, and you almost died. And that's when Maria was saying she was divorced." Frank was quiet for a while. "And then a few years ago, I met her again." Nancy dropped his fork. "How was the meeting? Is she alive?" "I can't say she's very happy, but she's alive." Frank told about their meeting, told what Maria had said, and said it was very hard for her. Jenna was crying. Andrew was hugging her. "I thought I had no one at all but Andrew. And I have a mom. You know I'm going to find her no matter what it takes. I'm sure she lives like this because she doesn't have anyone either. And I will, and we'll be fine." Early in the morning, Andrew, Jenna, and Frank left for Leh. The first day of the search yielded nothing. The factory that Maria said they all lived in was being rebuilt, and no one could live there anymore. The next day, it was decided to talk to the local homeless people. They could obviously help them. It turned out to be not so simple. But they must have been communicating with each other. Because when tired Frank sat down to rest on the embankment, and the young people went to get water and pies, he was called. "Man, why are you causing confusion? Why do you need me?" He quickly turned around. Maria was standing next to him. She had aged even more. She was looking at him carefully. "Frank, are you there? What could have happened? Why did you come looking for me?" The man saw that Andrew and Nancy were already walking towards them. "The important thing is to hold Maria until they get there. More at Maria's. There's another man too, very much looking for you." "What other man? Who in the world would want that? Don't head my head or talk to me, or I'm out of here." The young people are getting closer. "Mom." Maria turned pale, while woke up and slowly turned around. Nancy dropped the water bottle and rushed towards Maria. The woman first clambered back a step and then rushed towards Jenna herself. They embraced, both crying and whispering something to each other. Andrew and Frank waited. They decided to have the wedding in their village at the very end of summer. It would be warm, and it wouldn't interfere with their studies. At first, Andrew hesitated. "Dad, but after all, we have all friends in LA, and Bad is the friend who can't shake a few hours on the train for a friend's wedding." Andrew hesitated, but after a few days, no one said no. Everyone is going. Maria was staying with them for the time being. She had already gotten a job not without Kate's help, and was becoming more and more like a normal woman. Janet practically never left her side, oddly enough. But neither did Nancy. Maria knew so many lullabies that the girl fell asleep to a new one every night. The tables stood outside. Frank looked around at the guests. Here was a life considered gone, some merry. At the table, friends, relatives. To his left sat his parents, and his mom and dad are already quite elderly, but he's doing well. Farther away are Molly and Sebastian, and at the same time they were not spared. But they're having such a nice conversation with his parents. 20 years ago, the two families wouldn't have even looked at each other. Next is Nina talking to Christina. Next, Emily. He has kept in touch with them all the years and sent invitations to them. Almost first of all, on the left, Maria. Today, she is unrecognizable. Beautiful dress, high hair, heels, makeup. It's time to marry her off. Frank smiled. Why he, like his colleague, takes care of her and pampers and spoils her. And he himself does not take his eyes off Maria. Frank looked at his wife, with Nancy sitting on his lap, and this is his greatest happiness. Nancy literally lace. Jenna and Kate had been looking for a dress for her for days, but now Nancy was very proud and insanely beautiful. He intercepted his wife's gaze, took her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed it. Frank raised his glass at the table. Everyone hushed. My dears, I would like to wish you and everyone at this table not to give up. If something does not work out in your life, and life is a strange thing, you have to keep going. There's bound to be something ahead of you. And even if your life is on a bad streak, you can't give up. Believe me, the misfortunes will surely end, and ahead of you will be waiting only bright and good. Bitter.